Imagine that you possess a magical key, an ancient artifact capable of unlocking the doors of your mind and unleashing an immense power, still unknown to you. This is not a secret spell or a relic forgotten by time, but something far more powerful. Autosuggestion. Throughout history, the greatest sages have spoken of mastering the mind, of the ability to transform reality through thought, of shaping destiny through willpower. But few have managed to explain this mystery with the clarity and effectiveness of Emile Coué. His method is not just a collection of ideas, but a practical tool, a map that will guide you on the most important adventure of your life, the conscious control of your thoughts to achieve happiness, health, and success. In this text, you will discover how the words you speak and the thoughts you nurture can become seeds of prosperity or chains that limit your potential. You will learn to plant the right phrases in your subconscious, those that, when repeated with conviction, will blossom into confidence, well-being, and fulfillment. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and prepare for an extraordinary journey. Because from today onward, every thought you choose will have the power to change your world. Welcome to Emile Coué's method of autosuggestion. Preface. Due to the immense success I have encountered with it, I felt an urgent need to draw attention to Emile's self-suggestion method. In my opinion, it is incredibly brilliant in its simplicity. After hearing his famous phrase, "Every day in every way I'm getting better and better," many people have tried to improve it. However, if they had read his book, they would truly understand Coué's method and realize why it is important not to try to improve it by adding new details. Even Jose Silva, from the famous Silva method worldwide, in his attempt to personalize the phrase, only added one more better. The subconscious mind, or our higher self if you prefer, knows what we need. It is unnecessary, and in fact it is advisable not to add details to our self-suggestion. The amazing power of the subconscious mind allows it to know much better than we do, consciously, what our exact needs are. So why should we get in its way? It is quite possible that there are needs that need to be addressed before we can begin working on the needs we are consciously aware of. During a particularly difficult period in my life, I kept a journal in which I faithfully recorded my thoughts. Every night I noted both the bad and the good things. I got into the habit of rereading the pages from the previous week from time to time. I quickly realized that many of the negative events I talked about had actually triggered positive events. In fact, many of the positive things I spoke of could never have happened if the negative things hadn't happened first. In no time, I became convinced that I didn't really know what was good or bad for me. So, what should I pray for or meditate on if I don't really know what is best for me? What should my goals be? Someone much wiser than I advised me to simply ask for the knowledge of what is best for me, and as that knowledge becomes clear or available, to try to act accordingly. Then, I was told to simply continue doing what follows in the right way. From this perspective, Coué's affirmation makes perfect sense. Even if we don't know exactly what we need most, our subconscious or higher self truly knows, and we can use this knowledge by keeping the affirmation simple and trusting our subconscious for the results. Some hypnotists say that our subconscious mind doesn't distinguish between a real experience and an imagined experience. I disagree with this theory. I believe that our subconscious mind is capable of functioning in dimensions that we have not yet fully understood. We don't know exactly how it works, but we have begun to understand a little about how to use it. Some say that it does not respond to negative suggestions, then they perform regression therapy to eliminate the effects of negative impressions from the past. So, how does your subconscious work? It is truly not foolish. I believe it is powerful and amazing, and for a long time, Coué found a good way to use it. Keep reading and using it, and you will see how the results demonstrate it. Chapter 1. The Reality of Self-Suggestion. I want to say how delighted I am to personally connect with the great American public on their side of the Atlantic. But at the same time, I can't help feeling a little embarrassed. I had the idea that the people of this continent were expecting a marvelous, almost miraculous revelation from me, whereas the message I have to deliver is actually so simple that many are tempted to consider it almost insignificant. However, let me say here that however simple it may be, my message will teach those who consent to listen to it and reflect on it a key for permanent physical and moral well-being that can never be lost. Self-suggestion confounds with its simplicity for the uninitiated. Self-suggestion or self-mastery may seem perplexing in its simplicity, but isn't every discovery, every invention, simple and ordinary once it has been popularized and its details or mechanisms are known to all? I do not claim that self-suggestion is my own discovery, far from it. Self-suggestion is as old as the hills. Simply, we had forgotten to practice it, which is why we had to learn it again. Let's think of all the forces in the universe ready to serve us. However, centuries passed before man penetrated their secret and discovered the means to use them. It is the same in the realm of thought and the mind. We have at our service forces of transcendental value, of which we are either completely ignorant or only vaguely aware. The power of self-suggestion was known in the Middle Ages. The power of thought is immense. The world is dominated by thought, and the human being is individually completely governed by their own thoughts, whether they are good or bad. The powerful impact of the mind on the body, explaining the effects of suggestion, was well known to the great thinkers of the Middle Ages, whose vigorous intelligence encompassed the sum of human knowledge. Every idea conceived by the mind, said St. Thomas, is an order that the organism executes. It can also generate or cure a disease. The effectiveness of self-suggestion cannot be clearer. Pythagoras and Aristotle were two among those who taught self-suggestion. Indeed, we know that the entire human organism is governed by the nervous system, whose center is the brain, the seat of thought. In other words, the brain or mind controls every cell, every organ, every function of the body. Thus, it is clear that through thought, we are the absolute masters of our physical organism. And as the ancients demonstrated centuries ago, thought or suggestion can and indeed does cause illness or healing. Pythagoras taught the principles of self-suggestion to his disciples. He wrote, "God the Father, deliver them from their suffering, and teach them what supernatural power is at their disposal." Aristotle's doctrine is even more defined, teaching that a vivid imagination forces the body to obey it, for it is a natural principle of movement. Imagination indeed governs all the forces of sensitivity, while the latter controls the heartbeat, and through it sets all vital functions in motion. Thus, the entire organism can be rapidly altered. However, no matter how vivid the imagination is, it cannot change the shape of a hand, a foot, or any other limb. I'm particularly pleased to remind you of this element of Aristotle's teaching because it contains two of the most important, if not essential, principles of my own method of self-suggestion. 1. The dominant role of imagination. 2. The expected results of practicing self-suggestion must necessarily be limited to what is physically possible. I will address these essential points in more detail in another chapter. Unfortunately, all these great truths passed down from antiquity have been presented under the obscure veil of abstract concepts or wrapped in esoteric mysteries, thus seeming inaccessible to the average person. I have had the privilege of discerning the hidden meaning of ancient philosophers, or extracting the essence of a vital principle and formulating it in a simple and understandable way for modern humanity. I have also been fortunate enough to see it successfully practiced by thousands of patients for over 20 years, slaves to suggestion and masters of ourselves. Note what I say. I am not a healer. I can only teach others to heal themselves and maintain perfect health. Moreover, I hope to demonstrate that the scope of self-suggestion is practically limitless. We are not only capable of controlling and modifying our physical functions, but we can also develop our moral and mental faculties in any desired direction through the proper exercise of suggestion. In the field of education, there is vast potential for suggestion. From birth to death, we are all slaves to suggestion, our destinies determined by it. It is an all-powerful tyrant from which, unless we pay attention, we are blind instruments. However, it is within our power to reverse the situation, to discipline suggestion, and to direct it in the manner we desire. Thus it becomes self-suggestion. We have taken the reins in hand and become the masters of the most wonderful instrument imaginable. Nothing is impossible for us, except of course what goes against the laws of nature and the universe. How will we achieve this mastery? First, we must deeply understand at least the elements of the mental mechanism that constitutes the human being. The mental personality consists of the conscious and the subconscious. Generally, it is believed that a person's power and actions depend almost exclusively on their conscious self. However, it is beginning to be understood that, compared to the vast role of the subconscious, the conscious self is like a small island in a vast ocean, subject to storms and tempests. The subconscious has absolute power over the conscious. The subconscious is a permanent and ultra-sensitive photographic plate to which nothing escapes. It records everything, all thoughts, from the most insignificant to the most sublime. But that's not all. It is the source of creation and inspiration, the mysterious power that makes ideas sprout and materializes them consciously through action. If we agree to say that the starting point of our joys, sorrows, pains, well-being, aspirations and emotions lies in our subconscious self, then we can logically deduce that any idea that germinates in our mind tends to be realized. Hundreds of examples drawn from small incidents of daily life allow us to verify the truth of all this. To illustrate the action of thought on emotional faculties, it is enough to recall any serious accident or heartbreaking scene we may have witnessed. We immediately feel sensations of pain or horror, with more or less intensity depending on our individual temperament. Imagine sucking on a lemon. A simpler and perhaps even more striking example is the classic lemon. Imagine sucking on a sour and juicy lemon, and inevitably and instantly your mouth will fill with saliva. What happened? Simply put, under the influence of the idea, the glands went to work and secreted an abundance of saliva, almost as if you had actually bitten into a lemon, once again just thinking of a scratched pencil being drawn perpendicularly on a blackboard, and we can't help but shiver and distort our face under the impact, while the contracted nerves send a shiver from the back of the head down the spine. Therefore, we must be aware that it is impossible to separate the physical from the mental, the body from the mind, for they depend on each other. They are, in reality, one. However, the mental element is always dominant. Our physical organism is governed by it, so we are actually creating or destroying our own health and destiny based on the ideas that act in our subconscious. What I mean by this is that we are absolutely free to implant any idea we wish into our subconscious, which is an inexhaustible source of recording, and these ideas determine the entire direction of our being, material, mental, and moral. It is so easy to whisper to our receptive subconscious the idea of health instead of groaning about our problems, and those who do so can be sure of the result, because I hope I have convinced you that this is based on the laws of nature. Chapter 2. The Role of Imagination. Before explaining the practical application of self-suggestion and the extremely simple method by which anyone can gain complete mastery over their physical organism, I must talk about the extremely important role of imagination, the power of imagination over will. Contrary to the generally accepted theory, willpower is not the invincible force it claims to be. In fact, every time imagination and willpower come into conflict, it is imagination that prevails. Try to do something while repeating, "I can't do it," and you will see this truth confirmed. The very idea of being unable to accomplish something paralyzes the will. Self-control is achieved when imagination has been directed and trained to conform to our desires. In a sense, imagination resides in the subconscious, but it dominates it. Therefore, if we know how to guide it, our subconscious self will take charge of our material being and perform its work exactly according to our conscious suggestions. I cannot stress enough that in the practice of self-suggestion, the exercise of willpower should be strictly avoided, except in the initial phase of guiding imagination in the desired directions. This is absolutely the only manifestation of willpower necessary or even desirable. Any other voluntary effort is positively harmful to self-suggestion and will almost certainly have the opposite effect to the one intended. The law of reverse effort. Let's analyze the so-called strong willpower of history. Caesar, Napoleon, etc. You will find that they were all men of great imagination. Some ideas were implanted in their minds, and their persistent suggestions drove them to action. However, this is a digression. The law that my friend Chorus 1 calls the reverse effort is what I want to emphasize at this moment. Let us suppose that a man suffering from insomnia decides to try the effects of self-suggestion. Unless he has been warned beforehand, he will repeat phrases like, "I want to sleep, I will sleep," while desperately trying to fall asleep. This is fatal. The very act of making an effort has turned it into a force acting in the opposite direction of the original suggestion, resulting in the unfortunate man tossing and turning in his bed in a state of despairing insomnia. Imagination must be free from all hindrance. Let imagination do its work alone, without any obstacles. Stay passive. Through processes still mysterious and unexplained, our subconscious accomplishes wonderful things. Think about the most common movements of the human body and ask yourself how they work. What set the complex mechanism in motion when you reach out to grab a glass from a table or when you take a cigarette out of your cigarette case? No one knows. But if we cannot explain the phenomenon, we do know that it is actually an order resulting from a simple suggestion transmitted through the nervous system, which translates into action at a speed infinitely greater than that of light. Examples of the power of imagination. There are thousands of examples of the power of imagination in everyday life. There is one given by Pascal, often cited, that I cannot resist repeating here because it is a truly perfect illustration. No one would have the slightest difficulty walking along a board 1 foot wide when placed on the ground. However, place the same board across the street at the height of one of the American skyscrapers, and even the most intrepid would not dare walk on it. Anyone attempting to do so would inevitably fall into the void. One could not ask for clearer proof of the power of an idea. Yet there is another astonishing example in the impunity with which somnambulists perform the most dangerous acts, such as walking on a roof while holding on to the edge of a precipice, to the horror of their friends who might see them. If a somnambulist suddenly woke up in such a position, he would inevitably fall. Here is another example. Dr. Pinu, in his book on the philosophy of longevity, recounts that during dinner, the cook rushed to announce that she had made a mistake by mixing arsenic with the food instead of another ingredient. Several people immediately felt pains and nausea that only ceased when the cook came back to say that it was a false alarm. There had been no such horrible mistake. I have said enough to prove the irresistible influence of the idea or imagination on the physical organism. It determines pain, movement, emotions, and sensations. Its effect is both moral and physical. Therefore, we can logically conclude that human ailments, which are merely disruptions in the natural balance of the elements of our being, can be healed by the right kind of idea or suggestion. The moral factor in every disease to begin with, there is in every disease, no matter its nature, a moral factor that no doctor can afford to ignore. Some French medical authorities believe that this moral factor represents nearly 50% of the chances of recovery. A patient who tells himself, "I'm getting better," greatly increases his vital forces and accelerates his healing. By gently guiding our imagination in the right direction, we are sure to help nature, which manifests through our subconscious. The instinct for self-preservation is nothing more than a manifestation of nature. At the first sound of alarm, it hurries to save us, whether it's a cut on the finger or another injury, by sending a torrent of red blood cells to the wounded area. It is our wonderful subconscious that accomplishes this, as it knows, and directs every movement of our being, every beat of our heart, every smallest vibration of every cell in our body. It is a sublime instrument that we tend to misuse by letting harmful, disruptive, or discouraging thoughts interfere with its work, instead of allowing it to function smoothly and harmoniously. Miracles are attributed to fakirs in India. Whether they are legends or reality, I don't know, but it is certain that they accomplish amazing things simply because they are taught from childhood to know and use the invisible and still inexplicable forces that are latent within us, and that can be awakened by thought. The limits of self-suggestion are unknown. I'm often asked what the limits of self-suggestion are, and I sincerely reply that I don't actually know. The cures I have witnessed have sometimes seemed so astonishing and incredible that I refuse to theoretically place a limit. However, I want to emphasize that one should not expect from self-suggestion something that is clearly beyond the realm of material possibilities. For example, it would be absurd to ask for the growth of a new arm or leg, even though a lobster seems to know how to grow a new claw when necessary. There are people who, through long practice and concentration, have acquired an amazing power over their bodily functions. At the Faculty of Medicine in Paris, there are cases of men who can willfully increase their heart rate from 90 to 120 beats per minute, or decrease it to a point where the heart seems almost to stop. In another chapter, I will talk about diseases that have actually been cured by self-suggestion, and in general, its sphere of healing possibilities. One must be fully aware that thought or suggestion is capable of shaping the human body like a sculptor shapes his clay. Thought is an action. It is more than what Venheim believed when he wrote, "Suggestion is an idea that can transform into action." It is true that cases declared incurable have been healed through self-suggestion, and not just functional diseases. Long-lasting wounds and injuries that had resisted all other treatments were quickly healed through suggestion. Wasn't it Dr. Karnow who said that the wounds of victorious soldiers heal faster than those of the vanquished? I can assert without hesitation that whatever the disease, the practice of rational self-suggestion will always produce a notable improvement in the patient's condition, even if the disease itself is incurable. Chapter 3. Self-suggestion in practice. After the previous explanations of the theory of self-suggestion, my readers will surely be eager to learn the method and put it into real practice. We have seen that our physical organism is entirely dominated by our subconscious, which, obeying all its suggestions, whatever they may be, transmits them as an order to every fiber of the body, which responds or reacts immediately. The only obstacle to the perfect execution of the operation is the simultaneous intervention of the conscious will or reason. What we want to know, then, is the mechanism by which we can take control of our subconscious, or in other words, achieve self-mastery. The simplicity of subconscious control. The method itself is so simple that it has been ridiculed, just like all simple solutions to seemingly complex problems. However, its logic is irrefutable, and its effects are demonstrated every day of our lives. All you need to do is enter a state of mental passivity, silence the voice of conscious analysis, and then deposit in the always alert subconscious the idea or suggestion you wish to see fulfilled. Every night when you are comfortably settled in your bed and about to fall asleep, murmur softly but loud enough to hear yourself the following little formula. Every day, in every way, I am getting better and better. Repeat the phrase like a litany 20 times or more, and to avoid distracting your attention by counting, it is a great idea to mark the number on a piece of string with 20 knots tied in it. This is enough to set in motion the tremendous forces that we can control if we truly wish to. It is a simple suggestion. But this suggestion, launched into the mysterious laboratory of our subconscious, immediately translates into an active and living force, like the oracles of antiquity. The ancients were very familiar with the often formidable power of repeating a phrase or formula. The undeniable influence they exercised through the ancient oracles likely, or rather certainly, resided in the power of suggestion. If my method of self-healing through self-suggestion is undoubtedly simple, it is easy to understand and equally easy to practice. However, the human mind today is what it was in the days of the oracles. Some people insist on associating the healing of the body or mind with theories and complicated processes that are actually completely unnecessary. Why complain if things are made easier for you? People may ask why I limit myself to prescribing such a general and seemingly vague formula, as every day in every way I am getting better and better for all afflictions. The reason is that, as strange as it may seem, our subconscious does not need details. The general suggestion that everything is going well in every way is enough to trigger the persuasive process that will have effects on various organs and improve all functions. I have had incredible demonstrations of this over my many years of teaching and experimentation. Time and again, I have seen patients healed not only of the specific illness they sought relief for, but also of minor problems they had almost forgotten about. A general suggestion is better than specific suggestions. The fact is that our subconscious knows much more than we could ever know about our physical organism. Fortunately for us, think of the disorder we would be in if we had to manage all functions, from breathing to digestion, for example. Who would take on such a complicated task? The subconscious. And if it ever does its work poorly, it is always because, in one way or another, we have voluntarily interfered with it. Each organ or function is connected to the others and partially depends on them, and if the common person began to give orders to the subconscious to play with a particular organ, it would undoubtedly obey. However, it is highly likely that at that moment something else would go wrong due to insufficient knowledge or perhaps complete ignorance of physiology by the conscious mind. Do not focus and leave it in the hands of the subconscious. Avoid any effort when reciting the phrase, "Every day in every way I am getting better and better." You must release all effort and tension. Do not try to concentrate your thoughts. Concentration is very valuable and necessary when reasoning consciously, but it is detrimental to the success of self-suggestion. However, isolate yourself from anything that could distract your attention. Close your eyes if possible. You can achieve mental isolation even in the middle of a crowd. even in a tram if necessary. There is no reason not to practice self-suggestion under such conditions during the day, as long as you manage to reach the necessary state of passivity. At the risk of being accused of annoying repetition, I must insist on the need for passivity and inertia. Do not think that you must make an effort to impose your suggestion. The very act of making an effort will bring the conscious will into play, and this will actually raise a barrier between the subconscious and the suggestion, preventing it from penetrating. Now, as for applying the suggestion to specific afflictions, do not think that I totally discourage this. On the contrary, it must be recommended unreservedly in all cases where one wishes to relieve pain, correct functional disorders, or alleviate their symptoms. To eliminate pain, here is my method. Lightly rub the affected area with your hand while murmuring softly, as quickly as possible, to make it sound like a simple stutter. The words, "It's already passing. I'm getting better." Within a few minutes, the pain should disappear, or at least diminish considerably. The reason for murmuring the words is to avoid the risk that foreign or opposing thoughts may slip through the cracks that could result from clearer but slower speech. For the same reason, I advise English speakers to follow the French version, as it is much easier to say capable than the longer and clumsier phrase, "you are able." For those who suffer from insomnia, the procedure is different. Once comfortably settled in bed, gently repeat, but with a calm, peaceful, and uniform voice, "I am going to sleep. I am going to sleep." Of course, avoid any mental effort to achieve the desired result. The soporific effect of this repetition soon overwhelms, while if you actually try to sleep, the waking mind remains active due to the negative thought. In accordance with the law of converted effort, insomnia indeed offers a surprising demonstration of the devastating effects of willpower effort, the result of which is precisely the opposite of what is desired. Stuttering, lack of self-confidence, and paralysis can also be cured through self-suggestion. I have known cases of healing in a single session, although this is naturally rare. The cause of stuttering is simply the fear or the idea that one will stutter. If you can replace this idea with the conviction or suggestion that you will not stutter, that you are capable of pronouncing 10 words without stuttering, then there is no reason to stumble on the 11th. Then you are healed. Nervousness, shyness, lack of self-confidence, and even worse, nervous phenomena can be eliminated through the practice of self-suggestion, as they are simply the consequences of self-suggestion of an erroneous and unnatural nature. Those who suffer from these illnesses must establish a new set of suggestions by saying, "I am not nervous, I am calm and confident, everything is fine." In a fit of anger, try the effect of suddenly murmuring, "I am calm," and you will be amazed. There are many cases of paralysis solely due to the patient's belief in their inability to use the affected limb or part. They can all be easily healed by implanting the idea, "I can walk, I can move my arm, leg, or finger," and healing is achieved. Why? Because even if the lesion that initially caused the paralysis is healed, the patient has lost the habit of using their limb and continues to believe that they are incapable of doing so. It is evident that if the effects of such a subconscious suggestion are powerful, the effects of an opposite suggestion must be just as powerful. If you can transmit the suggestion to the subconscious mind, that is the whole secret. Chapter 4. Diseases that can be cured. Let us now discuss specific diseases that can be cured by self-suggestion. I must repeat what I said in a previous chapter. It is very difficult to set limits to the powers of self-suggestion within the limits of possibility, of course, because even in cases of diseases described as incurable, I have observed such extraordinary improvement in the condition of patients that even the most extravagant hopes would seem justified. Organic diseases can be influenced, and I can assert without hesitation that even organic disorders fall under the influence of self-suggestion. I am aware that this contradicts the theory of some doctors who may judge the matter too hastily, but my statement is supported by many other prominent members of the fraternity in France and elsewhere, who have found that their truth was demonstrated by real facts. Dr. Bachet, a professor at the Psychotherapeutic School of Paris and a distinguished member of the medical profession who began using self-suggestion and suggestion as a complement to the ordinary resources of medicine, recently cited the case of a young woman healed of stomach ulcers through the new method. There was no diagnostic error. X-rays had been taken, and surgery had been prescribed. Through suggestion, without the help of medications or other treatments, the patient recovered in 2 months, with vomiting ceasing in the first week. The same practitioner mentions the rapid disappearance of a tumor on the 10th rib in a young girl who also suffered from an anal fissure. The young girl had been ill for 2 years and bedridden for 3 months. Her temperature was high, and her general condition was poor. The power of suggestion healed her in 15 days. The tumor completely disappeared, and the fissure healed without leaving a trace. This proves that symptoms can be cured even if the disease itself is not. In my own experience, one of the most remarkable cases I remember is that of a young man who, though he was not cured of a serious heart condition, endocarditis, rid himself of all the symptoms. He now lives and enjoys life as if he were in perfect health. One day, the door to my office opened, and a pale, thin young man entered, leaning heavily on his father's arm. With each step, he stopped, and each breath he took resembled the painful panting of an exhausted animal. Poor boy, I did not expect to be able to do much for him. However, after his father explained his illness to me, I took care of him and demonstrated the power of self-suggestion through some simple experiments like the ones I usually do during my lectures. For example, I had him squeeze his hands tightly, then showed him that he could not release them while thinking and saying, "I can't, I can't." The boy was convinced, and he left full of confidence, promising to regularly recite my formula and diligently practice the principles of self-suggestion. I saw him again a few weeks later, and the change was already considerable. He was walking and breathing better, although his condition remained poor. However, the boy persevered and improved every day. When I heard about him again, he was playing tennis. During the war, he was exempt from military service because the medical exam showed that he still suffered from his heart condition, even though he appeared muscular and in good health. This demonstrates that symptoms can always be alleviated by self-suggestion, even when the disease itself is incurable. Now let's talk about diabetes. According to some modern authorities, this condition may sometimes originate from nerve problems. In general, of course, it is organic. In any case, it is known to frequently yield to self-suggestion practiced with perseverance. Recently, a patient succeeded in reducing his blood sugar by 80 grams in less than a month, and several painful symptoms also disappeared. Tuberculosis can also be helped, although I do not dare to say it can be cured by self-suggestion. However, I can affirm that in many cases it can be successfully fought through the practice of self-suggestion. This strengthens the body's resistance, and the patient helps nature's natural tendency to react against the disease. This is true in all cases of general weakness. I know a 60-year-old woman who had been sick for most of her life. When she came to see me for the first time, she thought she was near death. She weighed barely 98 pounds. Self-suggestion transformed her. The idea of health implanted in her subconscious gave her a self-confidence previously unknown to her. Her health improved so much that she recovered from a pulmonary congestion her doctor thought she wouldn't survive, and she gained 26 pounds. Sciatica, gastrointestinal issues, constipation, asthma, and headaches improve easily through self-suggestion. There is a man who suffered from headaches for 30 years and regularly took aspirin and similar medications. On certain days of the week, he would expect a headache. He was convinced that he would have one that day, and he did. Now he has directed his mind in other ways and has rid himself of his chronic headaches. I also know a man who suffered from sciatica, and according to a letter he recently wrote me, has hardly had any pain since the day he came to hear me explain the practice of self-suggestion. A young woman who now walks 8 miles without thinking about it, even though her doctor had considered her an invalid for many years, barely daring to move from her bed or couch. It is possible to restore lost tissues, as incredible as that may sound. These results are perfectly logical and natural because it has been demonstrated that under certain conditions, lost tissues can be repaired through the practice of self-suggestion. Women can maintain and improve their beauty, and now, a word of comfort for my beautiful readers who fear losing their beauty. Of course, you are right to want to stay young, fresh, and beautiful, and you can achieve this if you realize that you hold the secret yourself. It is this little fairy that resides in your subconscious, who asks for nothing more than to smooth those pesky wrinkles, give healthy flesh under sunken cheeks, or bring joyful radiance back to dull eyes. And of course, all you need to do is train your imagination to visualize your face or body as you would like them to be, and you will have a great chance of seeing them come closer to your ideal. I am not telling you that you can change the color of your eyes or hair, or alter the shape of your chin or nose. We must always stick to what is materially possible, but you can improve your appearance and ward off the assaults of age and fatigue. Fatigue should not be possible if you practice self-suggestion. It is largely a matter of imagination. Suppose you have a task to accomplish. If you think in advance this is going to be difficult and exhausting, it surely will be. You will yawn, and you will feel very tired and bored. But if you are in a different mindset and say, this is going to be easy, I will enjoy doing it, then you will not feel the slightest trace of fatigue. The best way to make a difficult task easier is to start. You must respect the ordinary rules of health. Needless to say, the practice of self-suggestion does not exempt you from following the ordinary rules of health and hygiene. Remember that we are using the forces of nature, so it would be foolish to try to fight against them at the same time. Lead a rational life, do not overeat, chew your food well, get enough exercise, and avoid excess. These are the laws of nature, and respecting them, combined with the knowledge of the all-powerful effects of self-suggestion, will keep you in good physical and moral health, and allow you to successfully combat all the ailments that man can inherit through tradition and heredity. The doctor is a necessity. Allow me to add with the greatest insistence that I do not advise you to forego the services of a doctor. Obviously, there are many cases where his advice, medicine, and care are absolutely essential, and the presence, prestige, and encouraging words of a doctor are always helpful to the patient, especially if they also make use of the wonderful tool at their disposal and accompany their prescriptions with appropriate suggestions. The results will be obtained much faster. I want patients and doctors to understand that self-suggestion is a powerful weapon against disease. Chapter 5. The Moral Power of Self-Suggestion. Let us set aside for a moment the subject of physical cures achieved through self-suggestion and discuss its role in our moral well-being. Train a child in the way he should go, and when he is old he will not depart from it, said the wise man thousands of years ago, and his words are as true today as they were then. And what is this education, if not the art of implanting a mass of suggestions into the young and receptive mind? These suggestions can be good or bad, and from this, the entire destiny of the child depends. Later, I will need to comment on the subject of rational and scientific education for children, but for now, I would like to emphasize the importance of suggestion and self-suggestion. For society, moral health is essential to physical health, and the community as a whole is interested in improving the moral health of its weakest members. Given the effectiveness of self-suggestion in this task, it must be clear to all that the new method opens up a magnificent field of possibilities in the direction of social progress. It provides us with the means to fight victoriously against the bad tendencies of our nature, whether inherited or acquired, to develop our intelligence, bring balance to our judgment, modify our mentality, and correct our moral weaknesses while healing our bodily ailments. Its generalization should lead to individual and social reform, and there could come a time when, freed from the bad suggestions that are poisons spiritually and physically weakening humanity, criminal society might embark on a new and glorious phase of greater harmony. Psychic cultivation is as necessary as physical cultivation. We all recognize the value of physical culture. It is not an exaggeration to say that its resurgence in my own country, along with the subsequent formation of a generation of young, robust individuals full of vigor and resistance, largely contributed to our victory in the Great War. Well, psychic cultivation is just as necessary. It will teach us to think in a simple and healthy way, to understand that we can and must be masters of events, not their toys. Psychic cultivation, through suggestion and self-suggestion, corrects our moral distortions in the same way that physical culture corrects our bodily defects. Not everyone can become a champion, but everyone can develop their personality in the spiritual or moral realm, just as anyone can increase their muscle strength through appropriate exercises. Self-suggestion to fight criminal tendencies, as I am convinced that it is destined to be increasingly widely used in the world's efforts to eradicate crime. I had the opportunity to test my method in Nancy with some young people with poor behavior, whose early criminal instincts had led them to a rehabilitation center. I believe good results were achieved, but unfortunately, I could not continue the experiments for long, because the poor young people were sent in groups and stayed only a few weeks before being transferred to the central facility in another city. However, the French authorities are very favorable to the idea of conducting a prolonged trial of my method, and I hope to devote myself to this task in the near future. I can also say that I have observed a great deal of interest in America regarding the question of self-suggestion as a remedy against the growth of crime. The power of suggestion in crime is a well-known fact. Crime is contagious. From time to time, all countries experience waves of crime or epidemics simply because the mind is influenced by suggestions, regardless of their source, more or less depending on the sensitivity or strength of the individual's character. In France, some time ago, the newspapers were filled with details about a bold train robbery. Immediately after, there was a repetition of the crime, committed in exactly the same way, and within 15 days 5 or 6 similar attacks on trains occurred, with identical details in the execution of all the cases. The epidemic was the result of suggestion. Not long ago in Paris there was a strange and surprising illustration of the power of suggestion and self-suggestion, one provoking the other and resulting in actions. A maniac pricked a woman who was shopping in a grocery store with a needle or syringe, injecting a liquid that caused swelling in the affected area. The newspapers briefly reported this, and the next day 2 or 3 other similar cases were reported. The number continued to rise until the victims numbered in the dozens, and the equally strange fact was that while suggestion created the perpetrators, self-suggestion created the victims, as a large number of women were convinced through their pure imagination that they had been pricked and felt the pain of a sudden sting. Interestingly, a similar epidemic had occurred during the time of Louis XIV. Another example of criminal contagion is found in the series of scalping incidents in the 17th century, when for a certain period there was not a day that went by without 1 or more women being scalped by enraged thugs. There was a similar epidemic 20 years ago. Cinema and films must again be considered, in certain aspects, as a school of crime due to the terrible effects of suggestion on unbalanced or untrained minds, and the fashion of stories like those of Netcarter was responsible for the ruin of many young lives in my country. Suggestion in reformatories has thus demonstrated the role of suggestion in provoking crime. It is logical to assume that suggestion is just as effective as a weapon against crime, because the idea is everything, carrying within it the seed of action. The field of suggestion in reformatories is vast. It could be practiced collectively, with the seed of suggestion being indiscriminately sown at first. Soon, the good soil would be discovered by its fruits. Then it would be necessary to separate the good from the bad. According to the eternal law of the contagion of ideas, subjects influenced by suggestions would reinforce each other, while the proximity of the resistant ones would tend to increase their resistance to good suggestions. Vice can be overcome. To those who ask me if vice can really be overcome, I answer categorically, yes. Through long and repeated suggestion, character can be modified. A proof that education or suggestion modifies character is that the instinct of self-preservation, the strongest of all, can be overcome, as demonstrated by many acts of sublime selflessness in favor of others recorded throughout history. Suggestion acts as a brake on bad instincts, and that is its negative role. It has a positive role in acting as a driving force for good impulses. Applied systematically and scientifically, there is no doubt that much of the so-called criminal classes could be rehabilitated, and thousands of lives transformed into citizens of pure thought, pure life, and usefulness. This is especially true when it comes to the young, with their vivid and vigorous imagination, open to all impressions. Except in the fortunately rare cases of entirely bad characters, it is the duty of those in authority to ensure that their imagination is nourished with something better than the seeds of crime. The sensitivity of youth is such that it is easy, except in the fortunately rare cases of entirely bad characters, to create vivid images or ideas of good actions in their minds. Once rooted in the subconscious, these ideas must inevitably grow and ultimately manifest in actions. Chapter 6. Self-Suggestion in the Education of Children. As paradoxical as it may seem to those who have not fully understood the principles and workings of self-suggestion, the education of a child begins even before birth. Without returning to the explanations given in the previous chapters, it is enough to say that imagination plays a supreme role in all the functions of life, and that, by disciplining it, that is, by practicing self-suggestion, a future mother can not only determine the sex of her child, as demonstrated by certain medical authorities, but also largely its physical and moral characteristics. She simply needs to allow her imagination to deposit in her subconscious the image of the son or daughter she desires, as well as the qualities she wishes the unborn child to possess. The result is assured. More importantly, a child thus conceived will be more receptive to suggestion than most others, which does not mean that their character is weak. On the contrary, it is likely that as they grow, they will replace suggestion with self-suggestion and acquire perfect self-control. It is enough to remember that our actions are primarily the result of previous external suggestions or examples. Therefore, the importance of starting early in the education of a child and controlling the suggestions meant to influence and shape their mind should be evident to all parents and educators. They must ensure that only positive suggestions are implanted in them and protect them at all costs from the bad ones. How to treat children. Have a balanced character with them, speaking in a soft but firm tone, persuading them to obey without giving them the temptation to resist your influence. Never be harsh with a child, because if you are, you risk provoking a feeling of fear accompanied by rudeness or even hatred. Avoid speaking ill of people in front of children, as it is inevitable that they will later follow your example, and gossip usually leads to disaster. Try to inspire in them the desire to understand nature, maintain their interest, answer their questions with clarity and good humor, and never neglect them, as many of us tend to do by responding with phrases like, "Don't bother me, you'll know later," etc. Above all, never tell a child that they are a liar, lazy, a fool, or something worse. Remember that such suggestions have a strong tendency to become reality, just like higher quality suggestions. Stimulation is particularly necessary for children. It is better to tell a child prone to laziness or neglect, "Well, today you did much better than usual. I'm very pleased with your work. You're improving." This may not be true, but it doesn't matter. The idea of improvement, excellence, and effort will take root in the child's mind, and gradually, with thoughtful stimulation, it will unconsciously become reality. Avoid talking about illnesses in front of children, as self-suggestion quickly transforms the idea into a physical reality and develops the very illness you wish to avoid. Instead, teach them that good health is normal, that illness is an anomaly, a humiliation that results solely from failing to respect the laws of nature. Never frighten children. Do not let a child fear the elements. Man is made to endure cold, heat, rain, wind, etc., without harmful effects. It's simply an idea that creates weakness. It is cruel to frighten children by talking about monsters, goblins, and things like that. The fear instilled this way can persist into the future and ruin their lives and destinies. Make work appealing. It is easy to make a child love work and study by making lessons appealing with appropriate anecdotes about the subject, also explaining difficult points with a smile and giving the impression that everything is very simple. The educator's ideal should be to ensure that their students look forward to the next lesson. Undoubtedly, the love of work must be instilled by helping them understand that work is natural and indispensable, while idleness is abnormal, unhealthy, and leads to all kinds of physical and moral ills. The malleable mind of a child easily absorbs such suggestions, which become permanent and shape their character. Show only good examples. It is unnecessary and not fitting for this chapter to list all the qualities a child should possess. What I wish to explain is the use of suggestion and self-suggestion in their education and training. We all know that example is better than precept, but we become more aware of this after studying the power of self-suggestion. Children are particularly sensitive to suggestion. They are always ready to copy what they see, whether good or bad. Therefore, the first duty of parents and educators is to set only good examples. Suggestion to children during sleep. Suggestion can be practiced with marvelous effects to correct any character flaw in a child and develop the qualities they lack. Every night, when the child is about to fall asleep or already asleep, stand about a meter away from them and then softly whisper what you wish to achieve, repeating 15 to 20 times the qualities you wish to cultivate and the effects you wish to correct. Do not be afraid to repeat the same phrases monotonously. This is the most powerful way to reach the subconscious. The subconscious does not need eloquence to be impressed. Simply stating the idea is enough, as anything more would be counterproductive to the intended goals. Suggestion at school. In schools, remarkable results can be achieved if teachers practice suggestion in their classes. Every day, before the start of lessons, tell the students to close their eyes. Then you can say something like this: "Children, I'm sure you will be well educated. kind to everyone, and obedient to your parents and teachers. You will always take note of their observations because you know it's for your own good. You are intelligent, which is why you love your work, even the subjects you previously disliked in class. Your attention will always be alert and focused on what your teacher says. You will have compassion for other children who might foolishly waste their time playing in class. As you are very smart, you will have no difficulty understanding the lesson, no matter the subject, and you will remember everything that is said to you. Everything will be stored in your mind, ready to be used directly when your knowledge is needed. The above is just an example of what could be said as a suggestion. Teachers can modify it and, undoubtedly, improve it to suit their particular needs. The important thing is to practice suggestion in this way. It doesn't matter if the children laugh a little at first, or if their attention wanders, or if, when the morning suggestion is undesirable, it is natural for them to understand its purpose. It has become something habitual. They automatically listen to the words without hearing them. In any case, the words reach the subconscious, and the ideas conveyed do their work with the same effectiveness. In short, it is essential that a child is imbued with the right type of suggestions. Everything depends on this. Play with imagination. Character is formed with imagination. Most often, what is attributed to heredity, whether moral or physical, is the result of ideas engendered by example. It is impossible to believe that a child is born a criminal. They become one through self-suggestion, just as they can become a valuable member of the community through self-suggestion, guided in the right direction. Chapter 7. The Masters of Our Destiny. Molière, known as the kind bourgeois man, spoke in prose without knowing it. In the same way, we all practice self-suggestion, often without realizing it. To some extent, self-suggestion can be automatic, in the sense that it may not be inspired or guided by deliberate reflection. But it must be all the more powerful in our lives once we understand its mechanism and learn to use it for our own purposes. The act of breathing is automatic, yet we can change our way of breathing at will. We can improve our health by learning to breathe in a certain way and regularly practicing breathing exercises. The same goes for self-suggestion. Once we become aware of it and learn to control it, we become the masters of our destiny. Babies automatically practice self-suggestion. Let me give you an example of the automatic practice of self-suggestion. A newborn in their crib starts crying immediately. The mother picks the baby up, and the crying stops. The baby is put back in the crib and the crying begins again, only to stop once more when the baby is lifted out of the crib. This process can be repeated an almost unlimited number of times, always with the same result. The child lacking conscious thought automatically practices self-suggestion. The baby receives the gratification of their unconscious desire to be held by their mother when they cry. If resistance is met, however, if the baby is left to cry alone in the crib, the subconscious records the fact, and the baby will not bother to cry, as they know it will have no effect. Self-discipline means health, and this is true for everyone. From birth to death, we live by self-suggestion. We are governed by our subconscious mind. Fortunately, we can guide it with our reason. However, like everything else, the science of self-suggestion must be learned. It is about educating oneself until total control of the subconscious mind is achieved. This means self-discipline and health. Prevention is better than cure. The idea of good health generates good health, and if by accident we fall ill, we are assured of having an infinitely greater chance of resisting and quickly recovering from the illness through the practice of self-suggestion than if we know nothing of its principles. Have you noticed during epidemics that people who go about their activities serenely, without worrying about themselves and without thinking about the epidemic, except to assure themselves that they are sure not to catch the disease, are almost always immune and avoid contagion? On the other hand, nervous people, frightened by the cases around them and constantly allowing their thoughts to focus on the prevailing illness, are the ones who are convinced they will fall ill despite all their precautions. The annals of the medical faculty of Paris record astonishing cases of the power of suggestion. Professor Boucher reports, among many others, the following. An elderly woman, desperate after undergoing surgery, was dying. Her son was to arrive from India 2 days later, and from a human perspective, it was impossible for her to survive that long. The method of suggestion was used. She was told that she was getting better and that she would see her son the next day. The result was a complete success. 15 days later, the elderly woman was still alive, and from a medical point of view, it was a miracle. Equally miraculous in appearance was the case of a man holding an important position in Nancy a few years ago. He came to see me suffering from sinusitis. He had undergone 11 surgeries, but the dreadful disease continued to wreak havoc. He was in a terrible state, both physically and morally. Day and night, without interruption, the unfortunate man was tormented by excruciating headaches that prevented him from sleeping. His weakness was extreme, and his appetite non-existent. Most of the time he lay prostrate on a couch. I must admit that I had little hope of being able to do anything for him. However, I did my best to convince him of the effectiveness of suggestion, and even though there seemed to be no improvement during 5 or 6 sessions, I could see that the man, as ill as he was, had gained absolute faith in the solidity of the theories I had explained to him. He told me that every day he directed his subconscious towards the idea of curing his illness. One day, he told me he believed he was feeling a slight improvement, though he wasn't sure. However, it was the truth, and the improvement continued rapidly. A full recovery occurred. Today, that man is perfectly healthy and able to work without fatigue. The nasal discharges that had occurred daily had finally stopped. I remember another remarkable case of collective self-suggestion, this time more or less automatic, which occurred in Dr. Renaud's hospital wards in Paris. A new serum, supposed to cure tuberculosis, had just been discovered. It was tested on patients, and seemingly, following the injections, all showed immediate improvement. The coughing diminished, other symptoms disappeared, and the general condition of all patients became very satisfactory. However, shortly afterward, it became apparent that the famous serum, which the patients had been subconsciously hoping for, was nothing more than an ordinary drug that had already been tested with negative results. Instantly, with the disappearance of their illusions, the patients lost all the improvement they had gained, and their previous symptoms reappeared. Modern miracles occur in our time just as they did in the past. I am talking about things that are called miracles because, of course, miracles do not exist. The modern miracle is accomplished through self-suggestion, this wonderful force that nature has entrusted to us, and which, if we delve into its mysteries, will make us all-powerful within the limits of human possibilities. Destiny and fatalism will lose their meaning, or will not be able to exist, except in our erroneous imagination, because we will be the only ones to forge our own destiny, constantly rising above the circumstances and external conditions that may occasionally arise in our path. Chapter 8. The Future of Self-Suggestion. At this point, it may be interesting to take a look at the future of self-suggestion. I have no doubt that the principles of self-suggestion are already firmly established, and a solid foundation has been laid for its practical application. This application will become more widespread as the principles are better understood, particularly among doctors. I cannot emphasize enough that self-suggestion, far from conflicting with medical science, is in perfect harmony with it, and is destined to become one of the most powerful means of healing at the disposal of physicians. There was a period of considerable activity in psychological research at the end of the last century, when Charcot and the famous schools of hypnosis were at the forefront in proclaiming the healing possibilities of the idea or suggestion. In Nancy, William James was also on the front lines of the same movement. Psychological research was halted by materialism, and fatalism followed. A period of skepticism and materialism ensued, declaring that thought was nothing more than a secretion of the brain, and that consciousness was simply a mass of sensations condemned to be the toy of circumstances. Our ills were irreparable because they were hereditary, and it was useless to struggle against the legacy of the past. This view, fashionable at the time, turned poets into pessimists and doctors into fatalists. Psychology seemed completely separate from philosophy, with ideas seen as effects unable to be causes. Doubt and pessimism took hold of the minds of the intellectual classes and infiltrated the masses. Abstract philosophical ideas were applied practically for therapeutic purposes, but the reaction was imminent. Soon a new, brighter and healthier philosophy emerged with William James and others to reveal the astonishing natural forces at our disposal that had been ignored or neglected for so long. If I mention myself here, it is simply to say that I have only demonstrated the possibility for everyone to use, for their own physical and moral well-being, the power of the subconscious revealed by the vague and abstract notions of the new school of philosophy. Others will continue the work, but I believe I can say that the foundations of a new practical philosophy with well-defined therapeutic applications have already been laid. It is now accepted that the human mind is a far greater force than previously believed. The facts, the healings obtained through self-suggestion, even in cases of organic diseases, have shown the importance of the idea in the treatment of bodily ailments. In London, Paris, and New York, institutes for the practice of self-suggestion are being established, moving beyond the purely experimental phase. The doctrine of self-suggestion is mature enough to enter the realm of universal application. In Paris, it has already reached the pinnacle of a great scientific movement that promises to grow rapidly under the direction of a group of enthusiasts, members of the Faculty of Medicine, philosophers, and scholars. An institute has been created for the teaching and practice of self-suggestion, and I hope that similar institutes will be established in other cities around the world. Soon, one will exist in New York. At the Paris Institute, a team of qualified men and women, some of whom belong to the medical profession, such as my disciple Dr. Pierre Bachet, as well as school professors and Dr. Béot, make up a permanent teaching staff. Their mission is to spread, through explanations and experiments, knowledge of the mysterious forces that we all possess, and to show patients how to use them for their own well-being. Thus, self-suggestion is becoming more and more an experimental science and a leading element in therapeutic, sociological, and educational fields. The creation of institutes such as the one in Paris will, I am convinced, be a powerful catalyst for the study of the wonderful resources of our subconscious. The development of applied psychology is still in its infancy. Applied psychology, whose vast developments are only just beginning, will teach us to know ourselves better, to possess ourselves more completely, to master the supreme powers that nature has endowed us with, and to use them for the development of our character and our physical, intellectual, and moral well-being. The subject goes far beyond the individual, and society as a whole will benefit from the self-discipline of man. The doctor has been called the last of the magicians, but we can all be much greater than the magician by simply using the extraordinary moral power and latent brain energy within us. We can revive intelligence paralyzed by doubt or ignorance, regenerate the physical organism, and strengthen the moral fiber. These are the ambitions we must aim for, foreseeing a strengthening of human nature whose consequences cannot easily be calculated. With the means available to everyone, we will progress as humanity, and each individual will feel within themselves the growth of this sublime force that elevates the individual both morally and physically. Perhaps one day the dreams of self-suggestion will come true, and humanity will free itself from the chains of materialism that still separate us from what we believe to be supernatural knowledge, but which is in reality already within us, simply waiting to be discerned. Who knows, perhaps prisons will become unnecessary once we have learned that even evil and bad actions can be overcome by suggestion. Delayed children will become normal, and delinquents will learn through their subconscious to become good and useful citizens. People still do not realize the immense benefits that self-suggestion, used for healing and educational purposes, can bring to individuals and society. But the light is spreading, and it will not be long before the new science finds its rightful place among psychological, sociological, and medical studies. Self-suggestion may develop more quickly in America than in Europe. Perhaps the study and practice of self-suggestion are destined to progress more rapidly on the American side of the Atlantic than on the European side. I do not know, however. I do know that hundreds of American men and women did not hesitate to cross the ocean to investigate my system in Nancy. In America, I was greeted by a multitude of friends and disciples, all eager to contribute to the spreading of the idea of self-suggestion. The conversion of such energy must necessarily be an immense power, which is why I am quite prepared to see the science stimulated and developed more widely in the dynamic atmosphere of the New World than in my own country. I'm not a healer. When under the shadow of the Statue of Liberty, I found myself bombarded with questions by a dozen journalists who had boarded the Majestic especially to meet me. I began to get a slight sense of the interest generated in America by the announcement of my lecture tour. When, shortly after, I was escorted by robust American policemen from the ship to the car waiting to temporarily take me to my home, and I saw the crowd gathered to welcome me, I was inexplicably surprised and moved to be regarded as worthy of such a reception. One might accuse me of lacking modesty if I say that I am proud and satisfied to have been received in this way, but I do not believe so. I know that all this sympathy and interest must be attributed to the characteristic eagerness of Americans to know and deepen the methods of self-suggestion associated with my name. Since my arrival in New York, the memory of which will never fade, I have not ceased to marvel at everything I have seen, heard, and read. My general impressions I will describe in more detail later. However, a certain feeling of astonishment that overcame me upon first contact with the American people continues to somewhat dominate me. Indeed, my astonishment has only grown as I became aware of the ideas that many people seem to have formed about me and my powers. I do not want people to have some kind of fanatical belief in me. It is true that blind faith is always an asset for a patient's healing possibilities. People who come to see me with the belief already established in their minds that they are going to heal are more than halfway to healing even before they meet me. But the number of people who can make direct contact with me must necessarily be relatively small. Even if I possessed an extraordinary magnetic power to heal, which I categorically state I do not have, the results of such a power would be limited for obvious reasons. On the other hand, there are no limits to the potential of the system I teach. What I mean is that I cannot reach everyone, but everyone can practice self-suggestion. My goal is therefore solely to show you how to heal yourself, by getting rid of the totally mistaken idea that it is I who can heal you. I am neither a doctor nor a professor. I had the first sign of the mistake America was making when the journalists from the Majestic addressed me as doctor and professor, and I was obliged to correct them by reminding them that I am neither a doctor nor a professor. The newspapers continue to talk about the healings I have performed in my so-called clinics, a term that is hardly appropriate for the small meetings I hold with a limited number of patients, aiming to convince them that by following my methods of self-suggestion, they can heal themselves or at least achieve notable improvement. Without a doubt, it has been a joy for me to see many of these patients benefit from my teachings, but my joy will be even greater if I manage to extend faith in these methods to thousands of people and instill in them the knowledge that they can heal themselves without even seeing me. And it will be impossible to achieve this goal if the impression persists that personal contact with me is necessary to obtain good results. Unfortunately, it is very difficult to convince some people that I have no influence on them when I tell them that they must rely on themselves, not on me. They tend to reply, "No matter what you say, you have power, and when I am with you, I get better results than when I am alone." Well, that may be true in many cases, but the reason is, as I have already indicated, that a person who has enough faith to come and see me is already halfway to healing because of that faith. There is another aspect to this question. If I had real power, it would surely have the same effect on everyone, but that is not the case. For some, my influence is absolutely nil, while for others, it can be immense, which shows that it is neither a factor nor can it be an essential part of the effectiveness of my system. It exists only in the imagination of certain people, and as I have explained convincingly, I hope in the previous chapters, imagination is all-powerful. In such cases, it really does help restore health. But it would be regrettable to let people think that personal contact with me is necessary. I want American citizens from all over the continent to understand that all they need is a proper understanding of the principles of self-suggestion, which is astonishingly simple, as well as belief in its effectiveness. It is enough to apply truths that have been known for thousands of years. I do not claim to have invented anything. I simply reduce theories that have been considered true for thousands of years to a simple formula. I have not invented a new faith, as some seem to suggest. One day, a gentleman interviewed by one of the newspapers described my method of self-suggestion as a direct challenge to the church. I must admit that I see no connection between religion and self-suggestion. Does medicine challenge the church? Self-suggestion is nothing more than the use of the natural forces and functions of our being, and it can be practiced by Catholics and Protestants, Muslims or Buddhists, without violating any of the precepts or doctrinal principles of these churches or religions. Did not St. Paul write about faith that moves mountains after all? It cannot be wrong to use the faculties that the Creator himself has given us, irrespective of religion. Other religious leaders view self-suggestion with suspicion because it has been associated with supposed miracles that I am said to have performed. Well, miracles do not exist. I have never performed them, and I never will. In fact, the so-called miraculous healings are the simplest and easiest to explain of all. They demonstrate that the sick simply believed they were ill. The thought produced or prolonged the symptoms, and in this sense they were truly sick. But as soon as they understood that their ailments could be overcome by imagination, they healed. It may seem unnecessary for me to respond to these rare criticisms that I received in the exceptionally understanding atmosphere in which I was immersed in America, but I am eager to clarify any misunderstandings. I want serious people to take me seriously. I want everyone to be convinced that the theories I propose, reduced to their simplest expression, are based on scientific facts.